In 1921, a coal miner in Logan County, West Virginia, carried his entire day of food in a metal bucket that weighed less than 2 pounds. He worked 10 hours on his knees in a seam 3 feet high, and that little bucket was the only thing standing between him and collapse. Most people think those men ate hearty farm breakfasts and came home to roasts. The truth is harder. Number 14 on this list was eaten cold, in total darkness, 1,000 feet underground. And number 3 was so cheap, the company store practically gave it away, yet it kept more miners alive than any doctor ever did. These 25 meals fueled the men who dug the coal that built America. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the rugged meals Appalachian coal miners actually ate before going underground. Number 25, cornmeal mush. Before the sun came up over the hollow, the mush pot was already on the stove. A miner's wife stirred coarse ground cornmeal into boiling salted water and beat out the lumps with a wooden spoon until it thickened into a hot, heavy porridge that sat in a man's stomach like a stone in the best possible way. Poured into a bowl and eaten with a little sorghum or a knob of lard, it gave a man enough slow-burning fuel to walk 2 miles to the tipple in the cold dark. A pound of cornmeal cost about 4 cents in the 1920s, less than a fistful of anything else in the company store. Leftover mush got poured into a loaf pan to set overnight, then sliced and fried crisp the next morning in bacon grease. Nothing was thrown out. A pot of mush was the floor of the coal camp diet, the meal that meant the money was thin, but nobody was going hungry yet. Number 24, killed lettuce. In the spring, when the first leaf lettuce came up in the garden patch behind the camp house, a miner's family ate something that sounds like a fine dining invention, but was pure mountain thrift. Tender young lettuce and green onions were torn into a bowl. In the skillet, bacon grease was heated until it shimmered. Then a splash of vinegar and a pinch of sugar went in, and the whole thing was poured, spitting hot, straight over the raw greens. The heat wilted the leaves down in seconds, and people called it killed lettuce or wilted lettuce because the hot grease killed it on contact. The vinegar brightened it, the fat made it rich, and a bowl of greens that cost nothing became something a working man actually looked forward to. Served beside a wedge of cornbread, it was the taste of winter finally breaking. After months of dried beans and salt pork, that first bowl of killed lettuce told a family that the lean season was over. Number 23, sardines and soda crackers. Down in the mine, 1,000 feet from daylight, a man could not exactly warm up a plate. So sardines became one of the underground meals of the coalfields. A flat tin of sardines packed in oil cost a nickel at the company store, kept forever without spoiling, and delivered a punch of salt, fat, and protein that a man burning through thousands of calories desperately needed. A miner would peel back the lid with the little key, drape the oily fish across a stack of soda crackers, and eat them sitting on an overturned bucket in the dark, the carbide lamp on his cap throwing a small circle of light. The crackers soaked up the oil. The salt replaced what he sweated out. It was eaten cold, quick, and without complaint, because a lunch break underground was measured in minutes. For thousands of men, the smell of sardines and the gritty crunch of a cracker was simply what the middle of a workday tasted like. Number 22, Vienna sausages. Right alongside the sardine tin in the dinner bucket sat the little can of Vienna sausages. Soft, pale, packed in jelly broth, they were never anybody's idea of fine eating, but they were cheap, they were already cooked, and they did not need a fire. A man could fish them out of the can with his fingers, lay them across bread, and have a meal in 30 seconds before the foreman hollered. A can ran about a dime and gave a working man a dose of fat and protein that beans alone could not match. Some men crushed them onto crackers. Some ate them straight from the tin and saved the broth to sop with bread. Vienna sausages traveled into the mine in lunch buckets across West Virginia, Kentucky, and Southwest Virginia for generations, and to this day an old miner will tell you the taste takes him straight back to the seam, the dust, and the sound of the coal cars rolling. Number 21. Pickled corn and pickled beans. Before refrigeration reached the coal camps, the only way to keep the summer garden alive through January was to ferment it. Late in the season, families packed shucked corn cut off the cob and snapped green beans into stone crocks with salt water and let them sour for weeks under a weighted plate. By winter, that crock held pickled corn and pickled beans, tangy and sharp and crunchy, the sour bite a welcome shock after months of bland starch. A spoonful on the plate next to soup beans woke the whole meal up. Right beside it on the table sat the chow chow, a relish of chopped cabbage, green tomatoes, peppers, and onions that families canned by the dozen jars every fall. A coal camp pantry was judged by how many jars lined the cellar shelves. Those crocks and jars were survival insurance, the difference between eating well in February and eating nothing but beans. The sourness was not a luxury, it was vitamins, and the old people knew it kept the sickness away even if they could not name why. Number 20. Poke salad. This one came free from the side of the road, and it could kill you if you got it wrong, which is exactly why it deserves respect. Poke is a wild green that sprouts thick across Appalachia every spring, and the mature plant is genuinely poisonous. But the young leaves, picked early and prepared the right way, fed countless coal camp families when the money ran out completely. The trick was that you had to boil it. A woman would boil the young poke leaves, pour off the water, boil them again in fresh water, then a third time, parboiling out the toxins each time before finally frying the greens in bacon grease, often with a scrambled egg stirred through. Skip a step, and you would be sick for days. Do it right, and you had a free, hearty plate of greens that tasted faintly of spinach and asparagus. Poke salad was depression food, lean season food, the meal that grew wild in the ditches when there was nothing in the garden and nothing in the meal sack. Mothers passed the boiling rule down like scripture because their children's lives depended on getting it right. Number 19, ramps and potatoes. For a few short weeks every spring, the mountains gave up one of their fiercest gifts. Ramps are a wild leek that grows in the damp coves of the Appalachians, and they carry a smell so powerful that children who ate them were sometimes sent home from school. Miners did not care. After a long winter, the strong, garlicky bite of ramps was exactly what a tired body craved. A man would dig a mess of them out of the hillside, and his wife would chop them and fry them down with sliced potatoes in a cast-iron skillet full of grease until the potatoes crisped and the ramps went sweet and soft. The whole camp would smell it. People believed ramps thinned the blood and cleaned out the system after months of heavy salted food, and modern science says they were not wrong about the nutrients. Ramp suppers became community events, whole hollows gathering to fry up the spring harvest. For a brief season, the poorest table in the coal fields ate like kings on something that cost nothing but a walk up the mountain. Number 18, fried apples. In the fall, when the apple trees behind the camp houses came in, a miner's wife sliced them thick, peel and all, and laid them in a skillet with bacon grease, a handful of sugar, and a shake of cinnamon. She let them cook down low and slow until the edges caramelized and the whole mess turned soft, dark, and sweet, the grease and sugar forming a syrup that clung to every slice. Fried apples went on the breakfast plate beside the biscuits, they got spooned over cornbread, and they went into the dinner bucket as the closest thing to dessert a working man could expect. Apples grew everywhere in the mountains and cost nothing off your own tree, which is exactly why this dish endured. In the fall, the smell of fried apples drifted through every coal camp in the hollows. It was the taste of the harvest, sweet and warm, a small reward at the end of a brutal day spent breathing coal dust in the dark. First pattern break. Here is where the story gets real, because none of these meals make sense until you understand the bucket. The dinner bucket, or dinner pail, was the single most important object a coal miner owned besides his pick. It was a stacked metal pail with 3 or 4 parts. The bottom held water, which a man drank as the day wore on, but it was down there for another reason too. If the mine flooded, or he got trapped behind a fall, that water might be the only thing he had. The middle held the meal, the beans, the bread, the bologna. The top held dessert and a tin cup. A man's whole survival for a 10 or 12-hour shift fit inside a container the size of a coffee tin. And here is what the coal companies never advertised. Many of those men ate everything cold, in the dark, sitting in coal dust, because there was no warm place to rest and no time to take. The bucket was not just lunch, it was the line between making it home and not, packed every morning by a woman who knew exactly what her husband was walking into. Number 17, apple stack cake. Sitting in the top of that dinner bucket on a good day was a slice of the most famous dessert in all of Appalachia. The apple stack cake was a wedding cake, a Christmas cake, and a coal camp celebration cake all in one. It was built from thin, sturdy layers of molasses and ginger cake, baked one at a time like big cookies because nobody had a tall cake pan, and stacked 5, 6, or even a dozen high with sweet, spiced, dried apples smeared between every single layer. Then the whole tower sat for a day or two so the apple filling soaked down into the cake and bound it together into something dense and moist and deeply flavored. Families too poor for store-bought ingredients made their stack cakes from sorghum and home-dried apples, and at a wedding, neighbors would each bring a layer to build the cake together. A slice in a miner's bucket was a quiet message from home, a sign that even down in the dark, somebody had thought to send him something sweet. Number 16, sorghum molasses on biscuits. In the coal fields, sorghum was liquid gold. Every fall, families with a patch of sorghum cane hauled it to the local mill, where a mule walked in circles turning the press that squeezed out the green juice, which was then boiled down for hours in long pans into thick, dark, golden syrup. A gallon of that sorghum had to last a family through the whole winter, and it went on everything. The simplest supper in the hollow was a hot biscuit split open with a pat of butter and a pool of sorghum poured over the top. The two mixed together with a fork into a sweet, rich paste and sopped up to the last drop. Children grew up on it. Miners ate it for energy before a shift because the sweetness hit fast and the calories lasted. Sorghum was not the same as molasses, and any old mountain cook would set you straight on that, but it did the same holy work. It made plain bread feel like a treat, and it cost only the labor of a fall day at the mill. Number 15, dried apple fried pies. When the apples came in heavy in the fall and a family could not eat them all, the women sliced them and laid them out on the tin roof of the porch or on screens in the sun to dry into leathery rings that would keep for a year in a sack. Come winter, those dried apples got stewed back to life with sugar and cinnamon, then spooned onto rounds of biscuit dough, folded into half moons, crimped shut with a fork, and fried in a skillet of hot grease until the crust blistered golden and crisp. A dried apple fried pie was the perfect thing to drop into a dinner bucket. It held its shape, it ate well cold, and it gave a man a hit of sweetness at the bottom of a hard day. The filling was concentrated and intense, the dried apples tasting more like apple than fresh ones ever did. For pennies and a little work, a family turned a fall surplus into a year of small luxuries tucked into lunch pails headed underground. Number 14, squirrel and gravy. Store-bought meat was a luxury in a coal camp, so a great deal of the protein on the table came off the end of a .22 caliber rifle. A boy who could shoot squirrels was contributing to dinner as surely as his father was at the mine. The squirrels were cleaned, cut up, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in a deep skillet until the meat was browned and tender, and then the cook made gravy right in the same pan, scraping up the drippings, stirring in flour and milk until it thickened into a rich, peppery sawmill gravy. Poured over biscuits, squirrel and gravy was a Sunday meal, the kind of thing a family was proud to set out. Rabbit got the same treatment, and so did groundhog when times were truly hard. Wild game cost a family nothing but ammunition and a morning in the woods, and it put real meat on tables that could not have afforded it otherwise. Every mountain family had a hunter because in the coal fields, the difference between meat and no meat was often a single good shot before breakfast. Number 13, souse meat. When a family killed a hog in the late fall, the rule was ironclad. You used every single part, and souse meat is what you made from the parts nobody talks about. The head, the feet, the ears, and the skin were simmered for hours until the meat fell away and the cooking liquid turned thick with natural gelatin. The cook picked all that meat off the bones, chopped it fine, seasoned it hard with vinegar, salt, black pepper, and red pepper, then packed it into a bowl or loaf pan and set it in the cold to firm up overnight into a sliceable, tangy, quivering loaf. Sliced cold onto bread or fried in a skillet, souse, sometimes called head cheese, was a cheap and filling protein that wasted nothing. To a modern eye, it might look strange, but to a coal camp family who had paid for that hog with months of saving, leaving anything on the bone would have been unthinkable. The whole animal fed them, and souse meat was proof of just how seriously they meant it. Number 12, liver mush. Across the southern coal fields, especially down toward the Carolina line, hog killing also produced liver mush or liver mush, one of the most beloved and most misunderstood foods in the region. The liver and scrap meat from the hog were cooked down, then mixed with cornmeal and a heavy hand of sage, black pepper, and salt, and pressed into loaves to set firm. The magic happened the next morning when a thick slice was laid in a hot, greased skillet and fried until the outside formed a deep, crackling crust, while the inside stayed soft. Slapped between two pieces of white bread or laid beside eggs and biscuits, fried liver mush was a powerhouse breakfast that sent a miner underground full and fueled. It cost almost nothing because it was built from the cheapest parts of the hog stretched out with cornmeal. A loaf lasted a week. For families counting every penny of company scrip, liver mush turned the leftovers of a single hog into morning after morning of hot, hearty meals. Second pattern break. Now here is the part that explains everything, the part that turned cheap food into a trap. In most coal camps, the miner was not paid in American dollars. He was paid in scrip, company money, little metal or paper tokens that were only good at one place on earth, the company store. He could not spend it in town. He could not save real cash. He lived in a company house, burned company coal, saw the company doctor, and bought every bean and biscuit ingredient at company prices that the company alone set. There is a reason an old song says a man owed his soul to the company store. A family that ran short before payday bought on credit against next month's wages, and a man could work an entire shift and come out owing money. That is why these meals were built around beans, cornmeal, fatback, and whatever grew in the garden or ran in the woods. Every cent spent at the store came right back out of the paycheck. The cheapest possible food was not a preference in the coal fields. It was the only way a family ever got out from under. Number 11, hog jowl and black-eyed peas. On New Year's Day, and on plenty of ordinary days too, the pot held black-eyed peas simmered slow with a chunk of smoked hog jowl. The jowl, the cured cheek of the hog, was one of the cheapest pieces of pork a family could buy, and it existed for exactly one purpose: to flavor a pot of beans or peas with deep, smoky, salty richness. It went into the pot with soaked black-eyed peas, an onion, and enough water to cover, and simmered for hours until the peas turned creamy and the broth pulled every bit of flavor out of that fatty cheek. Mountain folks believed black-eyed peas eaten on the first of the year brought luck and money for the 12 months ahead. And in a coal camp, a family needed every scrap of luck it could get. Served over rice or sopped with cornbread, hog jowl and peas was a meal that cost almost nothing and ate like it cost plenty. Faith and thrift simmered together in one pot. Number 10, red-eye gravy and country ham. When a family had cured their own country ham, salt rubbed and hung in the smokehouse for months until it was firm and intensely flavored, breakfast became a serious event. A thick slice of that salty ham was fried in a hot cast iron skillet until the edges browned and the fat rendered. Then the cook poured black coffee straight into the sizzling pan, scraping up every speck of browned drippings, while the liquid bubbled and reduced into a thin, sharp, reddish gravy. They called it red-eye gravy because of the way it looked in the pan. It was poured over the ham, over grits, over biscuits, the bitter coffee cutting clean through the heavy salt of the meat. This was not an everyday meal in most camps, because country ham was precious, and a whole one had to be rationed across the winter. But on the mornings it appeared, a man went down into the mine carrying the memory of it, a powerful, salty, eye-opening breakfast that stuck with him all the way to the coalface. Number 9, sawmill gravy and biscuits. When there was no ham and no meat to speak of, a coal camp cook could still put a hot, filling breakfast on the table with nothing but flour, grease, and milk. That was the genius of sawmill gravy. A few spoonfuls of bacon grease or sausage drippings went into the skillet. Then flour was stirred in and cooked until it turned the color of a brown paper sack. And finally milk was poured in, slow, and stirred until the whole thing thickened into a rich, peppery white gravy. Ladled thick over split biscuits, it turned a few cents of pantry staples into a breakfast hearty enough to send a man underground for 10 hours. The name supposedly came from the cheap, gritty gravy fed to crews at logging camps. But in the coal fields, it was simply how you ate when the meat ran out before the month did. A skillet of sawmill gravy and a pan of biscuits could feed a whole family of hungry children for pennies, and on a cold morning in the hollow, nothing ever tasted more like comfort. Number 8. Cathead. Biscuits. No coal camp breakfast was complete without biscuits, and the kind mountain women made were not the dainty little rounds you see today. They were cathead biscuits, big as a cat's head. That is exactly where the name comes from. Hand-shaped and crowded together in a greased pan, so they rose tall and soft with crisp, golden tops. They were made from soft winter wheat flour, lard, and buttermilk, mixed quick and barely handled, because the secret to a tender biscuit was working the dough as little as possible. A good cook could turn out a pan of them before the coffee finished boiling. Those biscuits were the foundation. Everything else got built on, split for gravy, spread with apple butter, packed in dinner buckets with a slice of fried meat tucked inside. A pan of cathead biscuits cost almost nothing and made a poor table feel generous. Every mountain woman had her own touch, and a man could near about tell whose kitchen he was in by the biscuits alone. Light, hot, and big enough to fill a working man's hand. Number 7. Apple butter biscuit. When the apple harvest was too big to eat fresh or dry, families gathered to make apple butter, and it became one of the great sweet staples of the dinner bucket. Making it was an all-day affair. A huge copper kettle of apples and cider simmered over an open fire in the yard, stirred constantly for hours with a long wooden paddle so it would not scorch, while cinnamon and sugar cooked down into the apples until the whole thing turned dark, thick, and glossy. The smell carried across the whole camp. Spread thick on a cold cathead biscuit, apple butter was the perfect sweet bite to find at the bottom of a lunch bucket 1,000 feet underground. It kept for months in canning jars, so a single fall day of stirring that kettle gave a family sweetness all winter long. For a miner eating cold in the dark, an apple butter biscuit was a small, dense piece of home, the taste of an autumn afternoon in the yard, sealed in a jar and carried down into the coal. Number 6, the peanut butter bucket sandwich. When the meat ran out and the money ran short, peanut butter held the coal fields together. It was cheap, it kept without spoiling, and it packed an enormous amount of fat and protein into a sandwich a man could eat cold in the dark with one hand. A miner's wife smeared it thick on white bread, sometimes with a layer of apple butter or sorghum to push it down a little easier, and that sandwich rode in the dinner bucket day after day after day. Children carried the same thing to school. It was the great equalizer of the camps, the meal that showed up when absolutely everything else had run out, because there was almost always a jar of peanut butter and a loaf of bread to be had at the company store. It was not exciting. It did not need to be. It was dense and sustaining, reliable, and it kept a man on his feet through the back half of a brutal shift. For a lot of coalfield kids, a peanut butter sandwich was simply the taste of their whole childhood. Third pattern break. Here is the hard truth underneath every meal on this list. These men were not eating cheap because it was charming. They were eating cheap because they were being slowly used up. A coal miner in the deep mine era breathed coal dust every working hour of his life, and that dust built up in his lungs until it hardened into black lung disease, a condition that left strong men gasping for air on their own front porches in their 50s. The food had to be dense and heavy because the work burned through a man like a furnace. 10 and 12-hour shifts of brutal physical labor on his knees in the dark, often in standing water, with the constant risk of a roof fall or an explosion. The beans, the fat back, the gravy, the peanut butter, all of it was calorie-dense survival fuel for bodies that were being broken on purpose for someone else's profit. When you understand what these men's lungs and backs and knees were paying, you stop seeing poor food. You start seeing exactly how much it cost to keep going. Number 5, fried bologna. They called it Appalachian round steak, and not as a joke. A thick slice, notched at the edges so it would not curl, was fried in a screaming hot cast iron skillet until it blistered and swelled in the middle. Slapped on white bread with mustard, it was a proper hot supper, not a snack. Bologna was one of the cheapest meats in the company store and kept for days, eaten fried at the stove or cold from the bucket below ground. There was no shame in it because the whole hollow was eating it too. Number 4, fatback and streak of lean. Before bacon came in a sealed pack, the coal fields ran on cured slabs of hog fat cut straight off a salt-cured hog. They were among the cheapest things in the meal sack, scored and fried slow until the fat rendered and the meat crisped. The cracklings got eaten straight, and the leftover grease was liquid gold, saved in a can on the back of the stove to fry potatoes and season beans. A coal camp kitchen revolved around that grease can. It was poverty food at its most honest, a few cents of hog that touched nearly everything else a family ate. Number 3, cornbread and buttermilk. Late in the evening, when supper had been small and a man was still hungry, one humble meal fixed everything. Cold cornbread crumbled into a tall glass of buttermilk, eaten with a spoon. The cornbread was real coalfield cornbread, baked in a hot greased skillet so the bottom crusted up, plain with no sugar because sweet cornbread was for people who did not understand cornbread. Crumbled into buttermilk, it went soft, cool, and tangy. Old miners ate it as a bedtime snack their whole lives. Cornmeal and buttermilk were two of the most reliable things in any pantry, and somehow it was always enough. Number 2, fried potatoes. Understand fried taters, and you understand how the coal fields fed themselves. Potatoes sliced thin and fried low and slow in a deep pool of bacon grease with an onion until golden was not a side dish here. For countless families, it was the whole supper. Potatoes grew easy in the gardens and kept all winter in the root cellar, costing next to nothing by the sack. The grease did the heavy lifting, the potatoes filled every stomach, and the onions cooked down sweet through the crisp slices. Some nights it was potatoes and cornbread and nothing else, and the children still asked for seconds. Number 1, soup beans and cornbread. At the top sits the meal that built the Appalachian coal fields. A pot of dried pinto beans, soaked overnight, simmered low for hours with a piece of fatback or a ham hock, an onion, salt, pepper, and thyme. As they cooked, the beans thickened their own liquid into a rich, brown broth that mountain people call the soup, prized as much as the beans themselves. A pound of dried beans cost less than a dime and fed a family for 2 days. You crumbled hot cornbread right in, set raw onion and chow chow on the side, and that was supper 5 and 6 nights a week, from West Virginia to Kentucky to the Virginia line. It got families through hard winters, bad seams, and strikes. Soup beans and cornbread was never just food. It was how the coal fields survived. Here is my challenge to you. Make one of these this week, just one. Then eat it slow, and think about the men who ate it in the dark 1,000 feet underground before walking home to do it all again. Tell me in the comments which one you are trying and whether your people ever worked the mines, because somewhere in your family there is probably a dinner bucket and a recipe still waiting to be remembered. These were not just meals. They were how a whole region kept going.